They quieted fast. A plant that lived on noise woke up to hospital silence. The main press motor sat slack and heavy. The air tasted like warm oil and damp metal. Tony Miller, 70, slid his scuffed backpack onto a bench and pretended to sweep. Consultants ringed the machine with cables and graphs. Brian, the floor manager, talked in numbers that sounded like losses. "You're useless now," someone had said yesterday, laughing. Tony drew a long breath. There it was, the sour edge of humidity, the wrong pulse in the frame, a whispering tremor against the concrete that shouldn't be there. "I know this language," he thought. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. Eyes cut through him. A small bet took shape, and so did the chance to wake what was sleeping in the factory and in him. If stories like this hook you, hit subscribe and come along. The morning light over Lorain, Ohio came thin and cold, glazing the lake's chop and the long, low buildings of MidWest Metalworks. Inside, the corridor to maintenance smelled like ground steel and yesterday's coffee. Tony held his new hire folder like a keepsake: timesheet, ID, emergency contact, a small photo of his late wife tucked behind the laminate where no one could see. At the turnstile, the guard didn't look up. Badge. Beep. Tony nodded anyway, a habit from years when faces mattered. Brian met him with a tablet welded to his palm. "You're the new janitor?" "I am. Fast pace here, predictive maintenance, cloud dashboards, smart sensors. Stay out of the way, keep things tidy, and don't move tools." There it was, the polite version of "don't matter." Tony smiled. "You got it." In the maintenance bay, 3 engineers hunched over a rolling whiteboard. Matt, jaw set, always presenting. Gabe, methodical, jumpy eyes. Leo, eager, still reading the room wrong. When they noticed the old man, a smothered laugh slid off the edge of the board. "Sir," Matt said, pretending deference, "we'll show you the broom closet. Lots of organizational impact to be made." Tony accepted the keys without flinching. He'd learned long ago that the quickest way to lose a fight was to look for one. He started with corners no one loved, under the parts bins, behind the solvent cabinet. He lined the open-end wrenches by size the way his hands remembered, brushed filings away from the press pedal where grit breeds accidents, and oiled a hinge that had been crying itself hoarse for months. The door stopped screaming. Nobody noticed, which was proof it worked. Work for Tony was reading. Metal leaves crumbs, bearings tell stories, heat stains write in color. From the main hall came a low beat, the plant's heart, steady enough, but with a hitch on the off count. He paused, broom bristles resting on rubber, listening the way doctors used to through the chest, not the chart. Lunch was a plastic container, white rice, sliced tomato, black pepper. He ate alone at the end table under the breaker panel. Across the room, the engineers laughed too loud at a meme about consultants and dinosaurs. Tony's flip phone buzzed. "Isabel. How's day 1? He typed back, quiet, learning the layout. He deleted "I missed this air" and hit send. The alarm came at 1:17 p.m., a sharp descending chirp that turned conversations into math. The main press motor run down to stillness. Belts coasted to a guilty stop. The line, 4 stations deep, froze with half-assembled frames hanging like held breath. Brian was already calling upstairs. Matt spread manuals like tarps. Gabe dove into the electrical diagnostic. Leo checked lubrication and pointed at a green bar on his screen as if it could argue with reality. Tony set the broom along the wall and drifted closer without entering the circle. The motor housing felt cooler than it should. The room's damp sat heavier here, a cling you could taste. There was a faint oiliness near the equalizer chamber that didn't belong. He brushed 2 fingers across a seam and felt grit where there should be smooth. "Assistant says morning at best," Gabe muttered, eyes glassy. "Morning?" Brian repeated. The word was a layoff with a clock. "We're bleeding 6 figures an hour." "Parameters read normal," Leo said. Tony almost smiled. Normal is a word paper likes. By 3, the consultants arrived. Richard and his team, shoes too clean, Pelican cases clicking open like promises. They draped sensors, started data streams, dropped terms like breadcrumbs. Tony stood back and watched where their eyes didn't go. They checked electronics, then hydraulics, then fuel delivery, all by the book. The book was written for dry air and different tolerances. The day was wet. Ohio had been a sponge for a week. Evening found the plant tired and fluorescent. The consultants packed up with practiced regret. Complex issue. We'll bring specialized equipment tomorrow. Brian signed a number that would curl any stomach. At the time clock, the line guys were quiet in a way that smelled like fear. Tony washed his hands in the deep sink, the water cold on tendons already singing, and caught his reflection in the steel splash. Older eyes, steady hands. For a flicker, he saw the younger version. Same hands, new scars, standing over a stalled line in Dearborn with 2 Germans swearing at a manual, and a kid from Ashtabula hearing the fix in the vibration. The bus ride home was an old hymn. Brakes, sigh, seat springs. His little house, flagstone path, porch light that flickered when it rained, held the kind of quiet that lets memory ring. On the shelf above the TV, a photo. Tony grinning beside a block he'd brought back from the dead. Beside it, a picture of Maria, head on his shoulder, that smile that called him home. He opened the cedar box under the coffee table and lifted a cloth. Tools. Not pretty, not new, but exact. A custom spanner with a notch only he would put there. A small driver ground to fit a port no catalog covered. His phone lit up again. "You good, Dad?" "I'm home," he wrote. He didn't add, "and the factory is the rest of it." He laid 3 tools on the table and turned them in his hands, feeling weight and memory. Tomorrow wasn't a plan so much as a pull. He set the alarm an hour early, slept light, and woke with the lake wind tapping the window like a reminder. Before sunrise, he was at the plant. Joe and Sam, old-timers with shoulders like tool chests, were already waiting on the line, coffee in paper cups, saying nothing because they didn't need to. He put a hand on the motor's skin. The night had left it damp. He leaned close, listening. 2 millimeters somewhere. A bore that thought it lived in Arizona when it lived here. He nodded to himself. The diagnosis was a sentence his body knew by grammar, not Grammar's name. By the time the others filed in and the overheads blinked bright, Tony had decided on 3 small moves that would look like almost nothing. Almost nothing is what good fixes look like. The wrong people confuse that for luck. Brian spotted him by the panel. "What are you doing, Tony?" "Listening." "To what?" "Your margin." Heads turned. Matt smirked. Gabe frowned. Leo hugged his tablet to his chest like a shield. The consultants' SUVs rolled in again, right on time. Tony dusted his palms and said, "Give me 5 minutes." It wasn't official, but everyone heard it. A wager made of air and pride. If the old janitor fixed what the experts couldn't, people would have to say the quiet parts out loud. If he failed, he'd go back to mops and jokes. Brian squared up, trying to look like a manager and not a man with a hole in his stomach. 5 minutes. No power applied until I say so. And you don't touch anything that can't be undone. "Wouldn't dream of it," Tony said. He opened his box. The tools weren't shiny, they were familiar. A thin spanner with a filed heel. A stubby driver with a notch that should not exist. A feeler he'd ground years ago to read a throat the catalog forgot. Joe had already set a small cart with rags and solvent. Respect comes in small preparations. Richard arrived mid-scene, voice smooth as a memo. "What's this?" "Trial," Brian said. "We're out of time." Richard's smile was professional. "We performed a comprehensive analysis yesterday." "Yeah," Joe muttered, and the line's still dead. Tony didn't argue. He worked. First, the nameplate on the frame. Tiny mark, almost a scar, tropicalized variant. He'd seen that mark in Texas and in Florida. He'd learned the hard way that the standard spec assumed air that Ohio didn't have this week. Second, he traced the air path with a fingertip, paused at the equalizer chamber and wiped moisture into a rag. The rag came back with the sheen of something that had crept past a good seal. Third, he cracked a compensation valve a quarter turn and eased a return port that read, "within tolerance," but was wrong for the day's weight of air. "Those parameters are normal," Leo said, offended on behalf of numbers. Tony looked at him kindly. "Normal where?" He didn't wait for an answer. He slipped the custom driver into a port made for a tool no one sells, made a minor correction a camera would miss, then seated the valve with a touch that was pressure and history. Time, Matt said, the word clipped. Tony stepped back. Let it breathe. Brian stared at the start button as if it could judge him. If this goes south, it won't, Sam said, not to boost Tony, but because experience sometimes hears the future. Button down. The first rotation was ugly, dry and stubborn. Then the second found rhythm. The third settled. The motor lifted its own weight, tone thickening, harmonics falling into place like bolts into threads. The line woke up in sections. People exhaled in laughter that tasted like relief more than joy. Richard took a step toward the frame. What exactly did you do? Gave it the air it actually has, Tony said. He tapped the mark. This variant pretends to be the standard. Ohio humidity doesn't care about pretending. Brian's face softened into something rare on shop floors. Gratitude without calculation. You just saved our quarter. Saved your morning, Tony corrected. The quarter will save together if you change the way you listen. Matt came over, cheeks hot. I was ahead of yourself, Tony said, rescuing him from the word wrong. Happens when your tools are newer than your habits. Words stacked fast. People from finishing drifted over. Someone from HR appeared. Then Henrique, in Ohio, let's call him Henry Carter, the plant director, took the stairs down in a suit that wasn't made for this floor. He watched the motor hold steady, watched the man everybody missed stand with his hands quiet at his sides. Name? Anthony Miller. Title? Tony glanced at the broom leaning where he'd left it. Janitor. Not anymore. Henry said reflexively, then caught himself. If you'll allow it, Mr. Miller. Tony didn't answer that part. He turned to the three engineers. You have questions. Ask. It started hesitant, then became a quiz-turned conversation. Gabe opened with combustion ratios. Tony separated stoichiometric from lean and added where power dies. Leo asked about torque from displacement and BMP. Tony gave the formula and when not to trust it. Matt, competitive even in humility, asked about diagnosing vibration only at specific RPM. Tony said the word the dashboard never says, resonance, and laid out a ladder. Crank balance, mount tension, transmission harmonics, in that order, not the one the manual prefers. People leaned in. You could feel a floor learn. Tony wasn't showing off. He was trimming the language so it could do work. Your sensors are good, he said. They're not ears. You need both. Richard surprised himself by stepping closer, curiosity winning. Those tools, did you buy them custom? I made some, Tony said. He handed him the driver. Richard weighed it like a question. Why that notch? Because the port lies about being square. The laughter this time was the kind that adds chairs to the table. Henry extended his hand. Mr. Miller, I'd like to talk about your role here. We can talk later, Tony said, eyes on the line. Right now you've got product to ship, and they've got a motor to reintroduce themselves to. Henry nodded. Managers don't love being told to wait. Good ones learn to. He turned to Brian. Get me numbers on this morning's loss avoided. Brian exhaled for the first time in a day. As the crowd thinned, Joe clapped Tony's shoulder. Knew you weren't just sweeping? I was, Tony said. You learn a lot sweeping. At the edge of the bay, Isabel's text blinked. How's day 2? He typed, noisy again. He didn't add and I can breathe, but the pause in his thumb said it anyway. The motor held a steady hum that smoothed the air like a hand over ruffled cloth. People drifted back to their stations with the slow reluctance of a crowd leaving a fireworks show, still glancing over their shoulders to be sure the sky wasn't going to light again. The line moved. The plant remembered its job. Tony wiped his palms on a rag that had known better days. He didn't strut or smile. He set his tools in the box with the care of a man putting away a story mid-sentence. Matt hovered near the edge of the bay, a question in each shoulder. Gabe stayed close to the control panel, recalculating a morning that suddenly cost less. Leo stared at the nameplate on the motor as if it had been a magic trick and he had missed the move. Mr. Miller, Richard said, the consultant's voice trimmed of its satin. Walk me through exactly what you saw. Tony considered the question. He didn't love the word exactly. It always made people think the world was a line and not a net. Humidity mostly, he said. You could taste it. This variance meant to breathe different. Somebody left it on a standard diet. Richard nodded once, the way a man nods when he wants to file something under rare but not impossible instead of something I should have known. And the tools? I made those years ago, Tony said. Because I got tired of fighting ports that lied about being square. That drew a low chuckle from Joe and Sam, who had seen enough ports lie for a lifetime. Henry Carter stood a step back, taking notes without a pen, eyes moving from the motor to the old man to the young faces around him. A manager can smell a turning point. Brian clapped his tablet shut and looked at the three engineers. Gentlemen, if you've got questions, ask them now while the room's still listening. The words shook something loose. Gabe cleared his throat. Okay, that equalizer chamber. Why would moisture pool there and not trip anything upstream? Tony leaned against the bench, careful with his back, careful to keep the motor's song in the corner of his ear. Because upstream is measured for flow, not state. Your sensors say how much and how fast. They don't say the air's heavy and the film's wrong. You won't catch that unless you lay a finger on the seam and let it tell you it's wearing the wrong coat. State, Gabe repeated softly as if the word had changed shape on his tongue. Leo stepped in, eager. But the tolerance on that return port is good for July in Phoenix, Tony said, kind as a sigh. Not for April in Lorraine with the lake breathing on you. We build for where we are, not where we wish we were. Matt folded his arms. His voice didn't aim to pick a fight now, only to survive the next one. How do you know when a simple adjustment is the right one and not just small for the sake of looking elegant? You don't chase small, Tony said. You chase right. Right often turns out to be small because wrong hides in corners. If you're wrenching big, either you're at teardown or you're advertising. The line's rhythm added a second layer of quiet to the space. Machines working right create a kind of hush. People listen differently inside it. Henry stepped closer. Mr. Miller, I won't push you today, but at some point I'd like to understand where you learned that kind of listening. Tony rubbed a thumb along the knurl of the custom driver. The metal carried old scratches the way faces carry old grief. On floors like this, he said. In summers that cooked and winters that bit. I had bosses who thought a manual could raise a child. I had mentors who showed me you take the engine's pulse with your fingertips first and your laptop second. Names? Henry asked gently. Some are gone, Tony said. He didn't say Maria. The name lived somewhere his tools couldn't reach. Richard had been studiously professional, but curiosity loosened his collar. You said you made these tools. Do you machine as well? When I have to. Tony set the driver down for him to hold. That notch there, you only grind it wrong once. You learn to respect steel like a person. How much it gives, what it won't take. Leo studied the driver too, as if it were an animal he wanted to tame. We never covered this in school. You covered the language, Tony said. Now you need the accent. Gabe opened his laptop, then shut it again. A decision visible in the hinge. Could you show us? I mean, not the trick. How to arrive at the trick. How to think. Tony watched the three faces line up. Pride trotting a pace behind need. I can, he said. But there's rules. Matt bristled before he could help it. Rules? Rule 1, Tony said, ticking with a work-blackened finger. You don't ask a sensor what a finger can tell you first. 2, he went on. You learn the sound of a good day before you try to measure a bad one. 3, when you don't know, you say so where someone can hear you. Pride is a fine thing until it costs other people their rent. The rules didn't come down like commandments. They landed like habits you could pick up and keep. Brian exhaled a laugh he needed. We should stencil those on the wall. Don't, Tony said. Just practice them until you don't need the wall. The pager on Brian's belt buzzed. He made the face of a man remembering his calendar. I have to get upstairs, Henry? Henry nodded. Go. I'm 10 minutes behind you. When Brian left, a small space opened. The kind that fits a personal thing. Tony felt it, and without deciding, filled it. I left this work for a while, he said, not looking at anyone. He looked at the motor's paint instead, at the way it had worn thin on edges. Family needed me. Contracts didn't. He didn't elaborate. The room didn't make him. The motor hummed the way friends hum when you can't find the rest of the words. Richard spoke with less caution and more respect. However long you were gone, your hands didn't leave. They remembered more than I deserved, Tony said. A ringtone broke the hush, an old one. Simple piano notes. Tony checked the screen. Isabel. He hesitated, then answered with the phone tucked close. Hey, kiddo. How's day 2? Her voice was brisk, doctor on break, heart between patients. Better than day 1. You sleeping? Eating? Working? He said, which to both of them meant breathing. I'll call you tonight. He pocketed the phone and found Matt watching with a look Tony recognized, the look of a son crossing a street he knew badly. Matt cleared his throat. I said some things yesterday, he managed. They were cheap. You were scared and you didn't know, Tony said. Cheap talk is how fear spends itself. I don't want to be that guy. It came out fast, and then quieter. I'd like to learn. Good. Start with the hinge you oiled without telling anyone, Tony said. Matt blinked. What? That door stopped screaming and nobody thanked you for it. That's the work. Keep doing the thing that, if it's done right, disappears. The compliment landed in Matt's chest like a warm weight. He nodded just once like a man agreeing to terms with himself. Gabe had reopened his laptop. He looked up, hesitant. Would you let us document the adjustments? Not to productize you, to build a checklist for this variant. Humidity considerations, minor tolerances, the accent. Write what you learned, not what I did, Tony said. My hands aren't reproducible. Your process should be. Leo scribbled in a notebook like he meant to keep it. Process, he said, tasting the word. Henry had kept quiet long enough. Mr. Miller, he said, stepping forward. I don't want to steal your day, but I want you on my calendar this week. I mean today, if you'll stay for a late lunch. I need to talk compensation and title. I also need to talk about something bigger than a line restart. Tony tilted his head. Bigger? Henry took in the 3 engineers, the old-timers, the consultant who had chosen to listen. Culture, he said. This morning our culture tried to fire the solution before it spoke. I'd like to fix that with you. Tony swallowed, and for a second his face wore the years. Then he nodded. I'll eat whatever the cafeteria is serving and you can tell me what you think that takes. Good. Henry looked relieved in a way only managers under quarterly targets ever do. 12:30. Conference room B. Brian will join us. Make it by the shop window, Tony said. I like to see the line. Henry smiled. We'll make it in the shop if you want. He left to chase his clock. Richard shook Tony's hand, fingers firm, something like apology and gratitude sharing space. If you ever decide to consult, call me, he said. And for once it didn't sound like a line. When they were gone, the room got practical again. Joe brought a crate. Sam found a marker. Tony started laying out parts for a quick teach and touch. A gasket seated wrong on purpose, a mount bolt torqued to almost right, a coupling with a whisper of misalignment. Okay, Tony said, voice easy. We're going to practice missing things. Missing? Leo asked. On purpose, Tony said. So your fingers hate the feeling. They went piece by piece. Tony had them close their eyes and run fingertips over edges, not to be poetic, but to force a different kind of seeing. He made them listen to a bearing spun by hand, guess at grease that needed changing by the way the sound thinned. He let each of them seat the custom driver in a port and feel why the notch belonged. At some point, Gabe looked up and noticed the clock. We've been here 40 minutes, he said, surprised. That's the other rule, Tony said. When you're doing it right, time thinks it belongs to you. Matt laughed, real this time. Can we put that on the wall? Practice it, Tony said again, and the refrain already had weight. A plant runner jogged by with a slip for shipping. The bay smelled like warm metal and coffee drift. The motor kept its tone. Tony handed the driver back to himself, then to no one, then to the bench where it belonged. He closed the box. Same time tomorrow? Leo asked, hopeful. Earlier, Tony said. The air tells more secrets before lunch. They dispersed slowly, not wanting to lose the thread. Tony stayed a moment longer, palm resting on the motor's skin the way you rest a hand on a sleeping shoulder. The machine answered with vibration, so even it felt like trust. He wasn't young. He wasn't done. The line had a voice again, and so did he. At 12:30, he'd sit with Henry and talk about names for the work he was already doing. Title or no, he knew what mattered. Teach them to listen. The rest would either follow or be corrected. He picked up the broom on his way out, not as a joke, not as a symbol, just because the floor had filings near the pedal again, and a quiet hinge deserves a clean path. Outside the bay window, the April light over the lake had brightened. The plant finally sounded like itself. Tony smiled without showing teeth and headed for the cafeteria, the box under his arm light as memory. The cafeteria was louder than the shop floor had been all morning. Forks clinked on trays, microwaves beeped. Voices rode the steam of reheated casseroles and factory coffee. But the center of gravity had shifted. People weren't talking about March Madness or gas prices. They were murmuring about the janitor who had woken the line. Tony slid his tray, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, canned green beans, onto the end of a table near the window. He'd picked that spot because it gave him a clear view of the parking lot, the rows of trucks and sedans lined up like soldiers. He liked knowing how people came and went. Machines and people both left clues in the way they carried themselves home. Henry Carter arrived a few minutes later with Brian trailing, tablet in hand. Henry didn't grab a tray. He set his suit jacket over the chair opposite Tony and leaned in like the cafeteria was a boardroom. "Mr. Miller?" Henry began, voice lower than the room's din. "What you did this morning bought this plant weeks of life, possibly months. I don't want to wait for lightning to strike again. I want you where you can throw it on command." Tony cut his meatloaf into patient squares. "I'm not a storm," he said. "Just a man who knows what his hands remember." Brian's tablet glowed with charts and losses averted. "Henry's not exaggerating," he said. "You shaved 7 figures off our bleeding. The board will want answers. They'll ask why we're paying consultants if we've got you. That's your problem," Tony said mildly. "I didn't do it to embarrass anyone." Henry studied him. "Then why did you do it?" Tony chewed, swallowed. He took his time. "Because silence is the hardest sound in a factory. When a motor stops, it feels like a life gone. I couldn't sit on my hands while the place flatlined." Henry sat back. For a moment, the businessman in him gave way to the boy whose father had worked nights on a mill floor. Respect had a weight. He let it rest on the table between them. "We'll talk again," Henry said finally. "But hear me. I'm not letting you stay invisible." The afternoon on the floor carried a new flavor. Whispers followed Tony as he moved from broom closet to bay. Men who'd passed him without eye contact now nodded. A few slapped his back, the way factory men show gratitude without words. Even the air changed. Confidence returned with the motor's hum. Workers straightened. Forklifts beeped less frantic. The rhythm of production had its own way of forgiving, once the line remembered how to sing. The 3 engineers reacted differently. Leo, notebook already filling, shadowed Tony like an apprentice desperate not to miss a clue. He asked questions in bursts, some good, some clumsy. Gabe balanced on the edge of skepticism, torn between his training and the evidence of his own eyes. He lingered near the control panel watching numbers, trying to fit Tony's intuition into data sets. Matt stayed defensive. He worked harder than anyone else on the floor that afternoon, triple-checking bolts, barking at line workers to keep pace. But his jaw stayed tight as though admitting respect would cost him blood. Near quitting time, Tony cleaned tools with his usual care. He always believed a tool deserved to be returned better than when it left the box. Across the bay, Leo hovered. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. Could I watch you set up tomorrow? I don't want to miss the details." Tony looked at him. The boy's shirt was untucked, safety glasses smudged, hair pressed flat from a helmet worn too long. But his eyes had the right hunger. "You can," Tony said. "But if you're late, you'll miss the lesson. Machines don't hold still for excuses." Leo nodded so quickly his glasses slid down his nose. "I'll be here." That night, Tony walked home from the bus stop under the sodium glow of street lamps. Lorraine's houses sat squat and tired, paint curling, porches sagging, but alive with porch lights and TV glow, the kind of neighborhood that knew what a paycheck meant. In his living room, the old cedar box still waited under the table. He opened it again, not because he needed anything, but because looking at those tools was like checking his own pulse. The spanner, the driver, the feeler, each carried scars from other lives, other plants. Maria's photo on the shelf smiled at him, eyes kind, hair pinned the way she liked for Sunday church. "They wanted to make me important today," he told her. The room didn't answer, but the silence was softer. He let it hold him until sleep came. Morning came with April rain. By 7, Tony was in the bay, floor damp, motor steady. Joe and Sam already had coffee in styrofoam cups. Leo arrived 10 minutes early, breath fogging, notebook open. "Good," Tony said without turning. "Engines respect punctuality." Leo flushed, but grinned. "Yes, sir." Gabe drifted in next, tablet under his arm. He didn't say he came to watch, but he lingered close enough that his silence admitted it. Matt showed up last. He didn't join them. He stood at his own bench, jaw tight, wrench flashing. Pride builds walls. Sometimes walls fall. Sometimes they thicken first. Tony laid out 3 parts on the cart: a gasket, a coupling, a bearing. He'd brought them from home, relics of jobs long done. "Close your eyes," he told Leo. "Run your finger around the gasket. Tell me what you feel." Leo obeyed, hand clumsy at first, then steadier. "It's, uneven. Thinner here." "Good," Tony said. "That edge fails first. Manuals don't teach your fingertip to notice." Gabe stepped closer despite himself. "What about load tests?" "Do those after," Tony said. "This comes before. Your senses are tools too. Don't forget them." Matt slammed his wrench harder than needed, the clang loud enough to echo. Tony didn't look his way. Respect can't be forced. It has to be grown. By mid-shift, word of yesterday's miracle had reached the local paper. A reporter called Henry's office, sniffing at a story. "Janitor saves plant millions." Henry sent them away for now, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Stories like that have legs. In the cafeteria, workers eyed Tony like a man who'd stepped out of rumor into flesh. Some nodded, some whispered. A few simply said, "Thanks," a word as rare on a shop floor as free coffee. Tony ate his lunch slow, alone by the window. He preferred it that way. But when he looked up, Leo was sitting across from him, tray half ignored, notebook open. "Why'd you really come back?" Leo asked, too young to know some questions way more than others. Tony stared out the window, rain streaking glass. He thought of Maria, of nights with her medicine lined up like soldiers, of contracts declined and flights not taken. He thought of Isabel, voice tired but fierce, telling him not to give up on himself. "Because machines don't forget you," he said finally. "Even when people do." Leo nodded, though he didn't understand all the way. That was fine. Understanding comes in layers. When the shift ended, Henry found Tony again. This time he brought paperwork. Contracts, HR forms, new titles. "Consultant Senior Technical Advisor," Henry read. "Pay scale adjusted, office if you want it." Tony wiped his hands on a rag. "I don't want an office." "Then a workshop, authority, a team." Tony shook his head. "I just want to stay close enough to hear the motors talk. You put me in a suit, I won't hear them." Henry studied him. He realized he wasn't recruiting an employee. He was negotiating with a conscience. "Then stay on the floor," he said. "But you're not staying invisible." "Not anymore." Tony packed his box, set the broom against the wall, and looked at the motor humming steady. For now, that was answer enough. Respect had weight. He could feel it on his shoulders, not as burden, but as something earned. And though tomorrow promised more battles, against doubt, against pride, against time, tonight the line was alive. And so was he. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the pavement slick and shining under weak Ohio sun. The factory smelled fresher, iron and damp concrete mixing into something almost clean. Tony walked the length of the bay with his broom in hand, but today eyes followed him openly. The men at the press line straightened when he passed. Forklift drivers lifted fingers from their wheels in a salute of sorts. He nodded back but kept moving. Respect felt good, but it was also dangerous. It had a way of asking for more than you wanted to give. By 9, Henry Carter had already been through twice pretending to inspect but really scanning for Tony. Word had reached corporate headquarters in Cleveland. They wanted to know why consultants failed in 2 days and a janitor succeeded in 20 minutes. Henry had promised a report by week's end. He needed Tony's story, and Tony wasn't giving it easily. At break, the 3 young engineers gathered near the vending machines, their coffee cups held like shields. Leo's notebook bulged with scribbles. He'd been up half the night copying every rule and phrase Tony had said. Gabe leaned against the wall, torn between loyalty to his training and the strange new respect he felt. Matt stood stiff, like a man guarding a wound. You saw how he did it, Leo pressed. That wasn't luck. He knew. Knowing once doesn't make him right forever, Matt muttered. One fix doesn't erase 30 years of new engineering. Gabe frowned. Maybe not. But you heard him explain resonance yesterday. That wasn't a guess, that was... He searched for the word. Deep. Matt drained his coffee. Or rehearsed. Old guys live on stories. But his voice lacked the sharpness of conviction. That afternoon, Tony found himself called upstairs. Conference room B had glass walls and a polished table that smelled like lemon cleaner. Henry was waiting, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. Brian sat beside him, tablet ready, nervous like a man balancing numbers and tempers. Henry gestured at the chair. Sit, Tony. Tony lowered himself carefully, knees stiff from years of ladders and concrete floors. He placed his hands flat on the table, palms scarred, nails short. They looked out of place against the sheen. Corporate wants your history, Henry said. I told them you were hired as janitor. That wasn't enough. I need to know what to tell them. Tony's jaw worked. He stared at his reflection in the table's gloss. Tell them I fixed what was broken. Henry leaned forward. I need more. Where did you learn? Who taught you? Why haven't we heard your name before? The room hummed with silence. Tony let it stretch, then sighed. I used to work plants bigger than this one. Detroit, Dearborn, even Texas. Helped rebuild press motors, diesel lines, systems too heavy for the manuals. Got called when things went quiet and money was bleeding. That's what I did. Brian's eyes flicked up from his tablet. So you were a consultant? Tony shook his head. I was a mechanic who got asked to solve problems. Titles never mattered. Henry saw the line Tony drew and respected it, but pressed anyway. Why leave? Tony's throat tightened. He pictured Maria, frail in her chair, hair thin from treatments, smile still brave. He pictured Isabel, 16, holding his hand at the funeral. His voice came out rough. My wife was sick. She needed me. Motors had to wait. Neither Henry nor Brian filled the silence. Men who lived by numbers sometimes knew when not to speak. Tony cleared his throat. After she passed, I took small jobs. Didn't want to go back to the circuits. Didn't think I still had it. You do, Henry said firmly. More than anyone on this floor. Tony looked out the glass wall at the plant below. Workers moved like ants, purposeful again. I don't want a title, he said. I don't want meetings. I just want to be close enough to hear the machines breathe. Henry nodded slowly. Then we'll call you whatever keeps you here. But you need to understand. What happened yesterday, it changed this place. People see you now. They're looking for more. On the floor, the engineers were waiting. Not openly, but in the way they lingered near his broom, near his bench, near his box of tools. At lunch, Leo finally asked the question they all carried. Mr. Miller, he said carefully, how do you know when to trust your eyes, your ears instead of the numbers? Tony forked a bite of potato, chewed, swallowed. Numbers are honest, but they don't tell the whole truth. Like a photo, it's real, but it doesn't smell, doesn't sound. Engines talk. You just have to want to listen. Can you teach us? Leo's voice was eager, almost pleading. Tony studied the boy's face. Too young to hide hunger, too proud to call it what it was. I can. he said finally. But you'll hate me half the time because you'll sweat and you'll scrape your knuckles and you'll think it's stupid to close your eyes and feel metal like skin, but that's how it sticks. Gabe leaned forward. I'll try. Matt stayed quiet. He stared at his coffee until it went cold. That evening, the local newspaper ran a small story. Janitor saves factory motor. Someone taped the clipping to the break room door. By morning, half the workers had seen it. Some laughed, some shook their heads, some slapped Tony on the back. The engineers flushed with embarrassment, caught between ridicule and relief. Tony tore the clipping down himself. He folded it carefully and tucked it in his pocket. Not for pride, but because Maria would have liked it. She always said he had a gift for giving dead things breath. He wanted Isabel to see it too, though he wasn't sure how she'd take it. When the shift ended, Tony lingered by the press. The motor hummed steady, alive, as if it knew the plant believed in it again. Joe passed by with his lunch pail and slapped his shoulder. See you tomorrow, Miller. Tony nodded. Tomorrow meant more questions, more stares, more wait, but also more teaching, maybe. And maybe, he admitted to himself, he wanted that. Machines don't forget you. Maybe people didn't either, if you gave them reason. He closed his box, lifted it under his arm, and walked into the evening light. The air smelled of rain and oil, and for the first time in years he let himself think, maybe I'm not done yet. The plant's walls always smelled of metal dust and machine oil. But on that Tuesday morning there was something else in the air. Anticipation. Word had spread further than the local paper now. Truck drivers bringing in steel coils asked about the janitor who saved the line. A union rep had called to confirm the story. Even the cafeteria ladies eyed Tony differently when he picked up his oatmeal. By 8, Henry Carter was waiting for him on the floor, suit sharp, shoes shining too clean for the grease-stained concrete. He carried no clipboard, no tablet, just intent. Tony, he said quietly. Corporate is driving down this afternoon. They want to meet you. Tony shifted the broom in his hands. I don't owe them a show. It's not a show, Henry insisted. They've got questions. I'd rather you answer them than me guessing. Tony looked past him to where the press motor pulsed steady, healthy. I'll be here. If they want to talk, they can find me where the noise is. The young engineers had gathered like planets around his bench by mid-morning. Leo had his notebook again, eyes glowing. Gabe kept his tablet closed but stood near, absorbing. Matt worked in silence, shoulders coiled, each clang of his wrench sharper than needed. Tony set 3 bolts on the cart. One perfect, one slightly stripped, one over-torqued. He slid them toward the boys. Tell me which one lies. Leo leaned close, running his fingers over threads. This one. It feels wrong, too smooth. Good, Tony said. Trust your touch. Gabe tried next, brow furrowed. This one's stiff. Over-torqued? Right again. Over-torque kills slower, but it kills just the same. Matt stood back, arms crossed. We have gauges for that, he said flatly. Tony met his eyes, steady. Gauges confirm. You want to catch a death before the machine does, you listen early. Matt looked away. Pride was a hard bolt to loosen. Around lunch, a ripple moved through the cafeteria. Conversations quieted, trays paused midair. Tony, sitting at his usual window seat, turned and saw her. Isabel, his daughter. White coat folded over her arm, hair tied back from her long hospital shifts, eyes too much like her mother's. She carried herself with the confidence of a doctor, but her smile softened when it landed on him. Dad, she said, wrapping him in a hug that smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. I had to see this for myself. Workers whispered. The old man who fixed the motor had a daughter who looked like she belonged in glossy magazines and hospital billboards. Respect grew legs when people saw the roots. Henry approached with a careful smile. Dr. Miller, welcome. We've heard much about you. Only the good parts, I hope, Isabel said lightly. Then, quieter to her father. The paper called me, you know. Said my father saved a factory. Why didn't I hear it from you? Tony's throat tightened. Because I didn't come here to make noise, just to work. She touched his scarred hands, still smelling faintly of oil. Some noise is worth making. After lunch, Isabel walked with him through the plant. She stopped at the humming motor, ran her palm along its warm casing. "This is it?" Tony nodded. "Stopped dead, costing thousands every minute. Nobody could wake it except these." He held up his fingers, still calloused, still steady. She smiled, but her eyes glistened. Mom would have loved to see this. He swallowed hard. She'd tell me not to be stubborn, to take Henry's offer, take the office, the title. Maybe she'd be right, Isabel said gently. You've given enough humility for a lifetime. By late afternoon, corporate arrived. 2 men in tailored suits, 1 woman with a tablet, shoes clicking too loud for the floor. They shook Henry's hand, then looked around until their eyes landed on Tony. Grease on his shirt, rag in his pocket, broom leaning against his bench. "You're Mr. Miller?" one asked, eyebrows raised. "Tony's fine," he said. They began their questions. What exactly had he changed? How could he be sure? Why hadn't he spoken up sooner? Tony answered steady, simple. He spoke of moisture, of calibrations, of listening to machines. He didn't dress the answers in jargon. He let the truth carry itself. The suits nodded, scribbled, whispered among themselves. Finally, the woman asked, "Why are you pushing a broom instead of running this floor?" Tony met her gaze. "Because nobody asked me until now." That evening, after the suits left, the plant felt different. Workers clapped him on the back, called him sir. The younger engineers lingered by his bench long after their shifts. Even Matt stayed, wrench in hand, watching silently as Tony cleaned his tools. Isabel sat nearby, waiting to walk him home. She saw the way men half her age leaned toward her father, the way older workers smiled at him with pride, the way Henry kept glancing as if already plotting bigger roles. "You can't stay in the shadows anymore, Dad," she said softly. "They need you." Tony closed the box of tools, locked it with a click that echoed in the quiet. He looked at his daughter, then at the line still moving, steady and alive. "Maybe they do," he said, "but I need them too. The machines, the work, the chance to give back what these hands still remember." Isabel smiled through her tears. "Then let them see you. All of you." Tony nodded, the weight of years sitting lighter on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more challenges, maybe more battles with pride and time. But tonight, walking home beside his daughter under a sky washed clean by rain, he allowed himself to believe something he hadn't in years. He was still necessary. The factory floor had its own heartbeat now. The motor Tony saved kept steady rhythm, and the rest of the plant moved to it like a drum line. But respect, once earned, doesn't just sit quietly. It demands to be tested, proved again. By Thursday morning, whispers of Tony's miracle had rolled past Lorraine streets, through union halls into neighboring plants. Workers from other shifts came early just to glimpse the old janitor. Some carried skepticism like lunch pails. Others carried hope. Either way, eyes tracked him wherever he went. Henry Carter knew opportunity when he saw it. By mid-morning, he called a meeting in the training bay, a wide space usually used for safety drills. Folding chairs were lined up, the smell of burnt coffee in the corner. Nearly 50 workers gathered, plus the 3 engineers, plus Richard, the outside consultant who hadn't gone home yet. Isabel stood at the back, still in town for another day, curiosity written across her face. Henry stood in front, sleeves rolled up. "Everyone's heard what Mr. Miller did for us," he began. "But respect can't live on rumor alone. Today, he's agreed to show us how experience becomes practice." Tony frowned from his seat near the wall. He hadn't agreed, not exactly. Henry had framed it as a demonstration, something small, something quiet. Now there were 50 expectant faces and a silence that begged for proof. He stood anyway. The broom stayed leaning at his bench. Today he carried the cedar box of tools. He set it on the table, the latch clicking open like a gun cocking. Matt leaned forward, arms crossed, jaw set. His pride had curdled into defiance these last days. To him, Tony's legend felt like a mirror showing his own inexperience too sharply. Henry gestured. "Matt, Gabe, Leo, join Mr. Miller. You 3 represent the best of our young talent. Let's see what knowledge looks like across generations." The crowd murmured. The 3 men stepped up, Leo's notebook was ready, Gabe's tablet clutched tight, Matt empty-handed but bristling. Tony laid out 3 assemblies on the table: a bearing, a gasket, and a coupling. Each had been deliberately set with a fault. Slight misalignment, hidden wear, uneven torque. "Engines don't shout," Tony said, voice carrying without effort. "They whisper. Your job is to hear it." He handed the bearing to Leo first. "Tell me what it says." Leo turned it, pressed it to his ear like a seashell, ran his fingers over the race. His brow furrowed. "It's off, slightly scarred. Would grind under load." Tony nodded. "Good. That whisper's easy if you listen close." Next he passed the gasket to Gabe. The young man examined it under the harsh light, then ran a finger around the edge. "Too thin here. Won't seat right, causes leakage." "Correct," Tony said. "You trusted your hand, not the numbers first. That saves hours." Finally, he slid the coupling toward Matt. The younger man picked it up, turning it over quickly, like speed might substitute for care. He frowned, then shrugged. "Looks fine, within tolerance." "Spin it," Tony said. Matt did. The faintest wobble trembled through the part. The crowd leaned closer. "Feel it?" Tony asked. Matt set his jaw. "Barely. Could be the table." Tony shook his head. "That wobble breaks mounts before your sensor ever blinks. You ignore it, you shut down a line." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Matt's ears reddened. "Anyone could miss that," he snapped. "Anyone who isn't listening," Tony said quietly. The words landed heavier than a shout. Richard, the consultant, stepped forward. "If I may," he said, voice even. "I'd like to test this myself." He lifted the coupling, spun it, and after a moment his lips thinned. He set it down. "He's right. That defect is subtle, but real." The room exhaled. Respect shifted a little more toward Tony, away from doubt. Henry seized the moment. "This is what I mean by culture. Our machines won't survive if pride comes before listening. Mr. Miller has shown us what years in the field can teach. I want this knowledge passed on, formally." The crowd applauded. Some clapped cautiously, others with full palms. Leo nearly glowed. Gabe nodded as if something inside him had settled. Matt stood stiff, his eyes dark. Pride stung, but not broken. Later, as the shift ended, Matt confronted Tony near the lockers. The others had gone, leaving the smell of sweat and metal behind. "You embarrassed me," Matt said flatly. Tony looked at him calm. "No. Pride embarrassed you. I just showed what was there. You think you're better than us." Tony shook his head. "I think I've failed enough times to know what failing feels like, that's all. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. If not, keep swinging your wrench harder than you need to." For a long moment, Matt said nothing. His fists clenched, then released. He left without another word. That night, Isabel walked with her father through the quiet neighborhood. Streetlights glowed orange, rainwater pooled in potholes. "You didn't want to be the center of attention," she said. "But now you are." Tony sighed. "Attention fades. What matters is what sticks when the noise goes quiet. Then what do you want to stick?" He thought of the engineers, of Matt's clenched jaw, of Leo's eager notes. He thought of the hum of the motor, steady now because he'd touched it. "I want them to hear the whisper," he said finally, "even when I'm not here to point at it." Isabel slipped her arm through his. "Then teach them, Dad. Even the stubborn ones. Especially the stubborn ones." Tony smiled at that. Machines were stubborn too until you found the seam where they'd give. Maybe Matt wasn't so different. As they turned the corner toward home, the factory lights still glowed against the night sky, steady and alive. Tony felt their hum in his bones, a reminder the work wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring another test. And he was ready. The Friday shift began with tension heavy in the air. Rumor had run faster than the forklifts. Corporate was returning, not just for questions this time, but to decide what to do with the man everyone was calling the janitor who shamed the consultants. Workers clustered in corners, voices low. Some expected Tony to be promoted on the spot. Others worried management would try to quiet the story, bury him back under a broom. And then there were those who simply wanted to see what the old man would do next. Tony, as always, carried his cedar box of tools. He set it down beside the motor he'd saved, as if the machine itself were a partner waiting to speak. His hands moved calm, but inside, his chest carried a storm. Henry Carter entered flanked by two corporate executives, both polished like new chrome. Behind them trailed Richard, the consultant who had been humbled but strangely kept returning each day. Today, though, Richard's arrogance had melted into something closer to respect. Henry cleared his throat. This plant owes Mr. Miller more than we can say, but corporate has questions, serious ones, and I think it's fair we hear them openly. One executive, a woman with a clipped tone, stepped forward. Mr. Miller, we've reviewed reports. Your interventions have saved us millions, but the question remains. What place do you have here? Are you a janitor who got lucky or something more? The floor fell quiet. Every worker, every engineer, every supervisor leaned in. Tony lifted a worn wrench from his box. Luck doesn't leave scars on your hands, he said, voice steady. This plant was dying, and I just listened to what the motor told me. Richard spoke up, surprising everyone. It wasn't luck. I've worked alongside engineers my whole career. What he did, what he knew, comes only from decades in the field. We'd be fools not to use it. Henry glanced at the crowd, then back at Tony. So here it is. I want to make Mr. Miller our senior technical advisor. He'd train, mentor, and lead improvements across every line. Full authority. The workers broke into applause. Leo nearly dropped his notebook in excitement. Gabe clapped, nodding firmly. Matt stood rigid, eyes dark, jaw locked. Tony raised a hand, and the noise quieted. I didn't come here for titles, he said. I came because I missed the hum of engines. But you're all asking for something bigger, and maybe it's time I stop hiding from it. He turned toward the engineers. This plant doesn't need a hero. It needs ears willing to hear, hands willing to learn. His gaze landed on Matt last, lingering, even stubborn hands. The words landed heavy. Matt's face flushed, and for a moment pride nearly snapped him in two. Then he stepped forward, voice sharp. Then prove it again, fix this. He pointed toward a secondary motor that had been groaning for weeks, a problem shrugged off as within spec. Workers murmured. They all knew the unit limped along but hadn't failed outright. Tony walked to it, crouched low, listening with his whole body. He closed his eyes, hand resting on the casing. The room stilled. Seconds stretched until the only sound was the faint, uneven rhythm of the motor itself. He rose slowly. Mounting bolts. One torqued wrong, vibrating against the frame. Give me 10 minutes. Matt crossed his arms. Impossible. We've measured torque already. Tony just opened the cedar box. Inside, his tools gleamed like old soldiers. He chose a spanner with worn edges, then knelt by the motor. His hands moved sure, deliberate. Each adjustment carried a rhythm no manual could teach. 9 minutes later, the motor's groan faded into a clean, smooth hum. The difference was so stark it felt like the room itself exhaled. Applause erupted louder than before, echoing off the metal walls. Henry smiled like a man watching history shift. Leo shouted, "He was right again." Gabe simply shook his head in disbelief. Matt stood frozen, pride stripped raw. Slowly, painfully, he extended his hand. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough. "Teach me." Tony clasped it, grip firm. "That's the first right thing you've said all week." The floor broke into laughter, not cruel but cleansing. The divide between generations cracked, and something stronger began to form. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the smokestacks, Henry addressed the gathered crew. "From this day forward, Mr. Miller isn't our janitor. He is our senior technical advisor. And more than that, he is our teacher." The men and women of the plant roared in approval. For the first time in years, pride in their work didn't just come from quotas, but from being part of a story worth telling. Isabel, standing at the edge, wiped a tear. She looked at her father, surrounded by men half his age calling him sir, clapping his back, hanging on his words. He looked lighter than she had seen him in decades. "You found your place again," she whispered. Tony shook his head gently. "No, I never lost it. I just had to wait for the world to remember." That night, walking home under the streetlights, Tony felt the hum of the factory follow him like an echo. The machines would break again someday. That was their nature. But now there would be ears trained to hear their whispers, hands ready to fix what failed. And maybe, just maybe, his own story could outlive him. And that was the story of Tony Miller, the janitor who reminded everyone that wisdom doesn't age, it deepens. Now I want to know from you, where are you watching from tonight? Write it in the comments. I'd love to see how far these stories travel. And if this one touched you, share it with someone who needs reminding. Experience is never wasted. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story we bring to life.